Prep Test 73, Section 4, number 13. In early 2003, scientists detected methane in the atmosphere of Mars. Methane is a fragile compound that falls apart when hit by the ultraviolet radiation in sunlight. So, any methane in the Martian atmosphere must have been released into the atmosphere relatively recently. See, I'm skeptical. Why do you know that? Why do you know that any methane in the Martian atmosphere must have been released into the atmosphere relatively recently? Why can't it have been there for a while? Well, because it's a fragile compound that falls apart when hit by the ultraviolet radiation in sunlight. Sunlight, you say? Does Mars get sun? Does Mars get a lot of sun? Does Mars always get sun? Could there be clouds on Mars? Is there a dark side of Mars? Are there caves on Mars? Big ones? The argument relies on the assumption that what? Assumption means missing piece, but this, an assumption that the argument relies upon, that's a necessary assumption question. And I'm looking for something here that has to be true or else the argument will fail. I would predict it very weakly worded. I would say, well, you have assumed that Mars sometimes gets sun. Because if that's false, that Mars sometimes gets sun, then it becomes Mars never gets sun, which would be a very powerful weakener. So when you negate something weak, it becomes very strong. So my prediction is, hey, Mars sometimes gets sun. A, Mars had no methane in its atmosphere prior to 2003. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. How does that change the argument? A can be false without ruining the argument. B, all methane in the Martian atmosphere is eventually exposed to sunlight. See, if that's false, that all methane in the Martian atmosphere is not eventually exposed to sunlight, then why would you say that any methane in the Martian atmosphere must have been released into the atmosphere relatively recently based on the evidence that it's fragile and breaks down in sunlight? B would be like, nah, there's a dark side of Mars. B is a perfect objection. I mean, when you negate B, it becomes a perfect objection to the argument. The answer is going to be B. It's like a sufficient weakener. It's going to be summary judgment. This is case over. If B is false, it is summary judgment for the other side. C, methane cannot be detected until it has started to fall apart. Maybe it can, maybe it can't. So what? D, the methane that the scientists detected had been exposed to ultraviolet radiation. Why does that have to be true? I mean, it may or may not currently be, what? So E, methane in Earth's atmosphere does not fall apart as a result of exposure to ultraviolet radiation. What if it does? What does that have to do with Mars? That would only strengthen the argument anyway, I think. B has to be true or else the argument will fail. That's how I know that B is a necessary assumption of this argument.